The room smelled like burnt wiring and old coffee. That's the first thing I noticed when I walked into the surgical simulation lab that morning. The acrid bite of overheated circuitry, mixing with whatever someone had left sitting in the pot since 6 a.m. The second thing I noticed was my father standing at the far end of the room, arms crossed, talking to Dr. Harmon like I didn't exist. Which, to him, I never really had. He didn't see me come in. Or maybe he did, and chose not to acknowledge it. With him, it was always hard to tell. I'd spent 29 years trying to figure out the difference, and I'd stopped keeping score somewhere around my third year of medical school. I set my bag down by the door and pulled my tablet out. The simulation system had been down since Tuesday. 3 days of delays, 2 missed training windows, and a robotic surgical console that no one in this building seemed able to bring back online. That was why I was here. That was why I'd driven 40 minutes in the rain at 5:30 in the morning instead of finishing the write-up I was already 2 days behind on. Nobody asked me to come. I just knew I could fix it. My father finally looked over when I reached the console. His expression didn't change that flat, measuring look he'd worn my entire life. The one that always made me feel like I was a math problem he'd already solved and found unimpressive. "Who let her in here?" he said. Not to me, to Dr. Harmon. Like I was a stray that had wandered in off the street. Dr. Harmon cleared his throat. "She's on the robotics team, Richard. I know who she is." My father's voice was perfectly even. "I'm asking why she's here. This is a department head meeting." There were 6 other people in the room. Residents, fellows, one attending I recognized from cardiothoracic. They all looked at their shoes. I knew that feeling, the specific discomfort of watching someone get quietly humiliated by a person who was supposed to love them. I didn't say anything. I pulled up the error log on my tablet and walked to the console. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My name is Claire. My father's name is Richard Holt, Dr. Richard Holt, Chief of Robotic Surgery at Mercy General in Atlanta, Georgia. A man whose name is on a wing of the hospital. A man who has given keynotes at conferences in Zurich and Tokyo. A man who has, on more than one occasion, been described in medical journals as visionary. My last name is Vasquez. That's my mother's name. She made sure of it when they divorced, when I was 4. She said she wanted me to have something that was hers to give, since my father had already made it clear that what he had to offer was conditional. I didn't understand that when I was 4. I understood it perfectly by the time I was 14. My father remarried when I was 6. His new wife, whom I will call my stepmother because that is what she was in every legal and emotional sense, had a son from her first marriage. My stepbrother, Marcus, was 2 years older than me, broad-shouldered and easy with a smile, the kind of boy who made adults want to ruffle his hair. He was funny. He was charismatic. He was not in any measurable way academically gifted. That didn't matter to my father. What mattered was that Marcus was there, present and visible, at every dinner and every weekend and every holiday. What mattered was that Marcus called my father Dad without being asked. What mattered was that my father, who had missed most of my childhood due to his schedule, found it surprisingly easy to rearrange that same schedule for Marcus's football games and graduation parties and college interviews. I am not telling you this so you will feel sorry for me. I am telling you this because you need to understand the specific architecture of what was built in that house, the hierarchy that existed before I was old enough to question it, the one I spent my entire childhood trying to earn my way into, and the one I finally, at 29, stopped trying to climb. I became a surgeon because I loved it. I want to be clear about that. Not to impress my father, not to compete with Marcus, who had gone into finance and was doing perfectly well for himself. I became a surgeon because the first time I stood in a simulation lab at 17 and watched a robotic arm follow my command with millimeter precision, I felt something shift in my chest like a lock turning over. I understood machines. I understood the logic of them, the way they failed, the way they compensated, the reason behind every error code. My mother's brother, Uncle Tomas, had been an electrical engineer, and I had spent every summer of my childhood in his garage in Tucson, learning to read circuit boards the way other kids learn to read chapter books. By the time I was in my surgical residency, I was the person the attendings called when the equipment went down. Not because it was my job, because I was the only one who could fix it without waiting 3 days for a service technician. My father knew this. He had never once acknowledged it. The error log was a mess. 3 separate fault codes, nested, each one masking the one underneath it. Someone had tried to restart the system without running a full diagnostic. which had compounded the original issue and created two new ones. It was the kind of mistake that happened when highly trained surgeons tried to troubleshoot hardware they understood the machine from the outside, from the interface. They didn't understand what was happening inside the wall. I understood what was happening inside the wall. I plugged my tablet into the console's service port and started running a manual override sequence. The room was quiet behind me. I could hear my father continuing his meeting, his voice deliberate and unhurried, as if I wasn't crouched on the floor pulling access panels. "The new training schedule rolls out Monday," he was saying. "I need everyone certified on the updated protocol by end of month. That includes your fellows, David." I found the first fault. A firmware conflict between the console's navigation module and the updated OR integration software. The kind of thing that only happened when a system update was pushed without checking compatibility across all components. I documented it, flagged it, and moved to the second. "What about the simulation lab?" one of the residents asked, tentatively. "We can't certify without the console being—" "The console will be handled by the service team," my father said. "I've already put in the request." I didn't look up. I found the second fault, isolated it, corrected it. The console made a low, cycling sound as it began to reboot the affected module. My father stopped talking. I heard him take 2 steps toward me. I kept working. "What are you doing?" His voice had a particular quality when he was trying to control it, a flatness that was almost worse than anger, because it was so deliberate. "Running a manual firmware reconciliation," I said. The update that was pushed last week wasn't cross-checked against the OR integration software. It caused a cascade fault. Should be resolved in about 4 minutes. Silence. "The service request has already been submitted," he said. "The service team has a 3-day backlog," I said. "You needed this up today." I heard someone in the back of the room make a small, involuntary sound. Not quite a laugh. More like a held breath being released. "Claire," my father's voice was very quiet. "This is not your concern." I looked up at him then. It was the first time I had looked directly at him since I'd walked in. "It will be in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, I said. I went back to the console. "I want to tell you something about silence. The specific kind that settles over a room when something is happening that everyone can see but no one is sure they're allowed to acknowledge. That room had that silence for 3 minutes and 37 seconds. Then the console powered on. The screens lit up, blue, white, and clean, running through their startup sequence with the calm efficiency of a system that has been correctly restored. The navigation module came online. The integration software hand shook. Every indicator light on the panel shifted from red to green in a neat sequential progression. Someone exhaled. I wasn't sure who. I stood up, closed the access panel, and unplugged my tablet from the service port. I pulled up my documentation notes and sent them to the department's shared drive, with a subject line that said simply, "Console fault log and resolution. Recommend compatibility check before next system update." I picked up my bag. "I'll get out of your way," I said to the room in general, not to my father specifically. I had learned a long time ago that directing things at him specifically left them nowhere to go. I was almost to the door when Dr. Harmon said, "Dr. Vasquez." I stopped. He was not a man who used titles carelessly. He was 62 years old, had trained at Johns Hopkins, and had shaken more hands than most people met in a lifetime. He looked at me the way people look at something they need to reassess. "How long have you been doing that?" he asked. "Fixing the consoles? Understanding them the way you just did?" I thought about Uncle Tomas's garage, the smell of solder and machine oil and the Tucson summer baking through the windows. "Since I was about 8, I said. He nodded slowly. Then he looked at my father, and my father looked at him. And something passed between them that I didn't have a name for yet, though I would later. I left. The call came 4 hours later. I was at my desk in the resident workroom, the one I shared with 3 other people who were all, thankfully, in the OR. I was trying to finish the write-up and failing, because my mind kept circling back to the simulation lab and the look on my father's face when the console came on. Not triumph. I want to be clear that I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was something more complicated, and less satisfying the exhaustion of having proven something that should never have needed proving. My phone showed a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. "Dr. Vasquez?" The voice was a woman's, brisk and professional. "This is the scheduling office for Dr. Eleanor Marsh. She'd like to meet with you at 2 o'clock today, if you're available." I knew who Dr. Eleanor Marsh was. Everyone in the hospital knew who she was. She was the chief of surgery. She had been chief of surgery for 11 years. She had rebuilt the department from a mid-tier regional program into one of the top 10 surgical training programs in the country. She was, in the specific ecosystem of Mercy General, the closest thing to a final authority that existed. She had never spoken to me directly in the 2 years I had been a resident. "I'm available," I said. Her office was on the 14th floor, which meant it had windows that actually faced something the Atlanta skyline, the sprawl of the city going gold in the afternoon light. There were no diplomas on the walls. Instead, there were photographs, operating rooms, research sites, a group of surgeons in a field hospital somewhere that looked like it might be sub-Saharan Africa, the kind of office that communicated, without stating it, that the person who worked there had no need to prove their credentials. Dr. Marsh was 61, small and precise, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the kind of handshake that meant something. "Sit down, Claire," she said. "Not Dr. Vasquez." "Claire," I sat. "I heard what happened in the simulation lab this morning," she said. I waited. "I also pulled your service records. Unofficial ones, the requests you've resolved without going through the formal maintenance system." She looked at me over her glasses. 43 interventions in 22 months. I hadn't counted. I hadn't thought about it as a thing to count. "You've been keeping this department's simulation and robotic infrastructure running," she said, "on your own time. Without credit, for almost 2 years. It needed to be done," I said. "The certification timelines, Claire." She said my name the way people do when they want you to stop explaining yourself and just listen. "I know about your father. I know how this department works, and I know the specific difficulty of existing in it with your last name. And I want to tell you something that I should perhaps have told you sooner." She leaned forward. "I have been watching you since your first month," she said. "Not because of your father, in spite of him. What you did this morning, the diagnosis, the repair, the documentation, that's not resident-level work. That's not even attending-level work in most programs. That is the work of someone who fundamentally understands systems. And that is rarer than any surgical technique I can teach." The afternoon light moved through the windows. I was aware of my own heartbeat. "I'm forming a task force," she said. "A robotics integration committee. New initiative, hospital-wide. I want you on it. Not as a resident, not as a junior member. As a technical co-lead." I stared at her. "Your father will also be on this committee," she said, without inflection. "As chief of robotic surgery, that's unavoidable. I want you to know that going in." "Why are you telling me?" "Because you deserve to know what room you're walking into," she said. "And because I think you've been walking into rooms unprepared for long enough." I didn't cry until I got to the parking garage. Not from sadness. From something that didn't have a clean name. The specific release of being seen by someone who had no obligation to see you. After years of being unseen by someone who did. I sat in my car for 11 minutes. Then I drove home, ate something I don't remember eating, and went to sleep for 7 hours straight, which was the longest I'd slept in 4 months. The committee met for the first time on a Thursday. 12 people around a conference table on the 14th floor. My father was at one end, Dr. Marsh at the other. I was seated midway down, not at the foot, not hidden, just present, with the chair that had my name on the placard in front of it. My father had known for 3 days that I would be there. Dr. Marsh had told him directly. I don't know what he said in response. I wasn't there for that conversation, and I didn't ask. What I know is that when I sat down and he looked at me from the other end of the table, something in his face moved. Not regret. Not quite. More like a recalibration, the expression of someone who has been working from an outdated map and has just been handed a new one. I had spent my whole life waiting for that expression. I had imagined what it would feel like to finally see it. It felt like almost nothing, not because I was numb. Because I had done something in those 4 months between the garage in Tucson and the parking garage in Atlanta and every console I'd fixed at 5 in the morning, I had become someone whose value did not require his acknowledgement to exist. That is a quiet revolution. It happens without fanfare. You don't always notice it until someone tries to use your father's approval as a measuring stick and you realize, distantly, that you've already put that ruler down. Dr. Marsh opened the meeting. The work began. 3 months into the committee, we identified a systemic integration flaw that had been causing intermittent failures across 4 of the hospital's robotic OR suites. Not dangerous, not yet, but trending in a direction that would eventually become a patient safety issue. I wrote the technical report. I presented it to the committee and then to the hospital board. My father was in the room both times. He did not interrupt me. He did not qualify my findings. He did not look at his phone. Afterward, in the hallway, he stopped me. I want to be accurate here, because I've turned this moment over many times, and I don't want to give it more weight than it had or less. He stopped me in the hallway, and he looked at me for a moment, and then he said, "That was a thorough report. That was all. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Not the sweeping acknowledgement that I had, at various points in my life, constructed in my imagination with a detail and specificity that embarrassed me now to remember. Just, that was a thorough report." And I said, "Thank you," and kept walking. Because here is what I have learned, and what I want to leave you with, because I think it is more honest than the version where the father breaks down and the daughter forgives him and everyone goes home whole. Some people are not capable of giving you what you needed from them. Not because you weren't worth it, because of the specific, particular limitations of who they are. And the moment you stop measuring your worth by what those people are able to offer is not a dramatic moment. There is no music. There is no general standing in a doorway to tell the room who you are. There is just a Tuesday morning, and a hallway, and a woman walking to her next meeting with her head up, carrying everything she built without permission. That is what freedom actually looks like. It looks like continuing. My uncle Thomas came to Atlanta in June. I took him to the hospital on a Saturday, when the floors were quiet. I showed him the simulation lab, the console I'd fixed, the robotic suite where we'd resolved the integration flaw. He walked through it the way he'd walked through his garage when I was 8, touching things lightly, reading the room, asking questions that cut to the center of every system. When we were leaving, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "In Spanish, your mother told me you were going to be something." "She was biased," I said. "She was right," he said. I thought about my father's face in the hallway, the thorough report, the recalibration. I thought about the console coming on, the green lights in sequence. "Yeah," I said, "she was." We walked out into the Atlanta afternoon, and the sun was everywhere, and I did not look back.